Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our first event for today for the Clothesline Online Festival. Today is a creative workshop demonstration with Amy Fisher, and it's a virtual program in this year's M&T Bank Clothesline Online Festival. This festival has been the Memorial Art Gallery's largest fundraiser for more than 60 years, and although we've had to go virtual this year, our goals are still the same. We want to make sure we're highlighting and supporting the arts and our artists. So thank you again for all joining us this morning. I just want to mention a few brief housekeeping items before we get started. So we have a live captioner with us today, and if you'd like to see captions, you can click the closed captioning CC button at the bottom of your screens. After today's presentation, we'll also have some time to answer questions that you've submitted. So please submit your questions at any time through our Q&A button at the bottom of your screen for Amy and for Rachel throughout the demonstrations today. And then your browser should take you at the end of today's webinar to a survey. So let us know how your experience was with this webinar. And I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Amy and Rachel now. So Amy Fisher is one of our creative workshop instructors. She graduated from Hollins University, where she studied art history in Italy and London, and from Rhode Island School of Design, where she received a master's with honors in museum education. As part of her master's thesis, she explored how the museum educator may enhance the viewer's engagement with a work of art. She's also designed online teacher resources for our education department at MAG, including a curriculum for teachers to use, the Learning to Look posters. She's also participated in MAG's Art and Story Stroll program. We also have Rachael Baldanza with us today. She's been a member of the Creative Workshop administrative team since 2004 and is the curriculum director for the workshop. She works directly with our teachers to ensure that our workshop classes are of high quality and in line with what students want to learn. Amy, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm gonna pass it off to Amy now, who is gonna tell us what we're learning today. And I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight her so that she's nice and big on your screens.
Good morning. So today I have a collection of 3 projects. They've been curated based on what I could personally find in my kitchen, with hopes that these might be somewhat common products that are in your house as well, so you can create kind of different sorts of pieces of art with your family. So should I get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, so the first concept came from, I don't know about you, but we've been going on lots of walks, lots and lots of walks, and have been coming home with all sorts of treasures. I have a 6-year-old. So we have a lot of acorns around the house, pebbles, flowers, these little types of seeds. And this project is inspired by these things, these treasures we're collecting, as well as Leonardo Da Vinci's drawings of botanical life. So we're going to do a botanical sketch or study based off things that you might find in your nature walks, as well as to put a spin on it to make paint out of coffee. So the first step is to make your coffee paint. So to do this, what you need is some coffee ground up, or I also have instant espresso, and I'm going to make some coffee paint right now. So if you take a mug and a filter, and then this is where the adults come in very handy. You're going to take some, you could do espresso, makes a really dark wash of paint, and then regular ground coffee makes a lighter version. It also depends on how much coffee grounds you put in your paint. So I'm going to put about, like, let's say maybe 2 or 3 little spoonfuls in this cup. And then I'm going to take some boiling water. So this is where you need your adults for sure. And you're going to just put enough water in here to basically cover your grounds. You're going to want to wait about 5 minutes, and then you can go ahead and actually test what you've made on your paper. So I've already made some out of espresso. This was regular coffee. And what you want to do is test it out and see how dark it's going to be before you start using it. So here is an example of where I tested out my different colors and what they look like. So you can do it one of two ways. Once it's actually been about 5 minutes, you can try it out by either dipping it directly into the grounds. And what's cool about that is you get texture, and it's usually pretty dark. So this is my espresso. Or you can take it out, the filter out, or kind of dip on the outside of your filter. And that will not have grounds in it. And that might give you a different kind of look. And in fact, what I pulled out there, it's pretty similar today. So while you're waiting for that to actually become paint, you are going to want to pull out some paper for this project. So the best thing to do is get some heavier paper, something along the lines of poster board, Bristol, or just anything a little bit heavy, because we're going to be getting this pretty wet. So what I really love to recommend and do is take a cookie sheet. In this case, I have a metal tray. And if you're working with your little buddies around the house, I really like to take it and tape your paper down to your tray. What's so cool about this is that then this can get as wet as they want to make it, and you can stay calm and cool, and they can have fun, and you don't have to get upset that water and paint is all over the place. So you're going to want to, this is painter's tape that we use for around the house. You could use Scotch tape too. The painter's tape is great because it keeps it from ripping the paper when you peel it off. But what's cool about this is it won't curl up on you, and you'll get a really nice crisp border around the edges. So it already will look like it's framed and ready for wherever you love to display art around your house. So we've done this step. We've made our paint. We've kind of tested it out. And now we've taped our paper down. So once you do all that, you're also going to want all those treasures I was discussing earlier for inspiration. Now, what's really fun is you could go about this any way you want. You could just take what you found and trace it and make it the exact same size. It depends on your interests and the age of the people you're working with. Or you can take these tiny treasures that you found in nature and draw them bigger and play with scale, which can always add an element of interest and just fun to anything when you make something bigger than it's supposed to be. So in this case, for this project, I drew 2 acorns, very big. I kind of had them almost fill up the page. So while you're drawing, it's great because your paint is still steeping. And by the time you get done with your drawing, your paint should be ready. Okay, so I have my drawing, which is a little difficult to see, but I have a drawing of 2 acorns on this piece of paper. Now the next thing I'm going to do is create a nice even wash. So I'm going to grab some of my paint that I made. Let's see, I'm going to use some of my coffee paint, which should be a lighter tone. And yet again, you'll want to test it out and see what it looks like. Okay, so my coffee paint is pretty light without the grounds. I'm going to try it with the grounds. That is much darker. So you just want to kind of decide which way you want to go with it. I am going to try it with the grounds and move it around. What's cool about this is that it tones your paper. You're creating a middle tone. So then in the end, you just have to add your shadows. And then if you have something like a white crayon or some chalk at the end, you can have a really nice highlight added later. So I'm just going to kind of move this around. And you can always add water to your paint if you think it's a little too dark. So I have toned my paper, and you're going to want to let this to pretty much soak in. And once this is dried and soaked in and you have this tone on your paper, you can then create this kind of pen and ink effect on top of your drawing. This is a piece that's already been toned. And next, what I'm going to do is pull out some brown markers to go with this kind of sepia toned theme, creating this Leonardo Da Vinci kind of idea. So I have different thick and thin Crayola markers here. Now I toned it first, and now I'm going to draw with these because Crayola is water soluble. This is really cool if you keep it in mind and you use it to your advantage. Or it can be really sad if you draw something, you put water on it, and then it blurs. So we're going to use this knowledge to our advantage today. So what you can do once this dries, pull out your thick and thin markers. You could use a crayon, you could use colored pencils also, it's up to you. And then pull out your reference, which is the thing you are drawing, and start looking and noticing where are there shadows, where is there light? And you can kind of create with thick and thin lines. If you feel like there's going to be, wherever there's a shadow, you can make your lines super thick. And wherever you think there's going to be light, you can use a thinner marker, a thinner line. We call this modulated line. So wherever it's light, use a thin line. Wherever there is shadow, use a thicker one. So once you go through and you add your thick lines, you can also start to add texture. So with texture, you can look at your object, and I notice that this is really smooth on the bottom. But then on the cap, the top of these acorns, there's a lot of bumps. So you can have fun with line and pattern. You can make it stylized so it doesn't have to look exactly the way you see it. You can put your own cool creative spin on it. So once you go through and do that, you're going to want to build up some values. And as you do this, you're going to want to find perhaps a smaller brush than what you put the tone in initially with. And I'm going to take my espresso paint and begin to add more shadows on top. Now, if you are feeling like, I am not going to make coffee paint, and I don't drink coffee, well, you can always do this with watercolor as well. You can play with your lines here by adding water and like activating it and turning it more into a paint. So this is the next step, is to lay in all your really dark shadows. And you may do this a few times. You might kind of come in and build up layers like you would with watercolor usually. And let's say you have a mistake. Let's say something gets a little darker than you intended it to be. Like let's say I have this line here. You could either move it around, or you can take what always saves the day in watercolor, your paper towels, and you can actually blot it up and it will act like your eraser while it's still wet. So once you lay in layers of paint, you create dark shadows. You may want to create a darker shadow behind and really kind of lay this on thick to kind of create a contrast. And adults, I definitely recommend having your own piece of paper so that you can try this stuff out too. And also it could be, if you wanted, the tryout paper. So if your little buddy is very meticulous, they can try stuff out on your paper to see how it works before they do it on their own. Okay, so this is a general idea of how you would start this. But the fun part, all of it should be fun, but one of the fun parts, I like adding a little pizzazz, a little highlight to things. So when you're done playing around with it, you can add as many washes as you want. You can thin out your paint with water, or you can make it thicker. You might want to let it dry for 24 hours. You can see here where it puddled up. It became almost like enamelized, where it's very thick and shiny. If you have anything, here I have a Crayola Twistable stick. These are really cool. They kind of act like oil pastels. But if you also have oil pastels or chalk or anything like that, at the end, you can look at what you drew and add some highlights. And this little extra bit is fun because you have your darkest shades, you have your mid-tone already. And then when you add in these highlights, it just adds another dimension and makes everything kind of just pop, which is super fun. And that is our Da Vinci inspired nature botanical sketch with caffeine included.
Wow, that's beautiful. I'm so impressed. I can't wait to try this later.
And this can be done with all sorts of things around the house. If you're a tea drinker, you could totally do it with tea too.
It looks like it has a shiny, kind of smooth texture too, which is interesting. Does it feel smooth, kind of glossy from the coffee?
It does. It definitely
Wow.
does. And for a few days, it was a little sticky. So it's definitely one of those tricky things. If you have the little person you're working with, if they like to, see what's going on, you might want to stick this thing in a safe spot where maybe high up or just in a place where it's okay to get things messy.
Wow, very cool. And I forgot to mention at the beginning of today's webinar that there are really nice PDFs with instructions that Amy created for all three of these demonstrations, and you can find those on our Clothesline website. So if you'd like to follow along after today's webinar and do it yourself at home, you can find those, and we'll share that link later today at the end of the webinar program.
So next up, we have another idea taken from the kitchen. We are now moving in to, we're here on Earth with our nature walks, and now we are going to be looking up to the sky for our next project. This is another watercolor inspired project that involves making paint from around things you have around the kitchen. And with this project, we're going to be creating a galaxy with watercolor or food coloring. So what you're going to want to do is, yet again, for this project, I recommend taping your paper in a tray, because this is definitely a wet project, and you're going to want to have a roll of paper towels. You may want to cover your surface as well as your people you are working with, because this can also kind of turn your fingers colors. But it will wash off. You won't be galaxy colored your whole entire life. So what I've done already is I found that Wilson's gel food colors makes these kind of bright colors. Of course, you want to look at the allergens on the back if you have kids with allergies, because it is a food product. You want to make sure like these are processed with peanuts, so you got to know your kid and your family before you start using this stuff. But they have some great colors that you can often see in a galaxy. And there's a lot of fun stuff you can do, because this, like the last project was a science project in the sense of making paint. This is kind of also science related, because you get to look up, reference a picture of a photograph of a galaxy and talk about stars. And you can do planets too as well. So you can make this as educational in many different fields or realms, depending on what your kids are interested in, or what you're interested in. So I have my reference, I have a picture of a galaxy, and now I need to make my paint. But one of the things you want to start with is looking at your picture. You want to look, there's usually a light spot in a lot of these photos, and then they kind of go out, getting slowly darker where the edges are black. So we want to keep this in mind as we go. So the first thing I'm actually going to do, because this takes a little bit of patience and waiting, is I'm going to get my paper wet, because we're working wet on wet. So that's for the tray covering up your kids, and the paper towels is really good. So first I'm gonna get my water. And I'm going to get a big round brush. Whatever you have in the house is great. Round brushes are awesome because it doesn't really make a stiff line. So it's like, it's supposed to be really soft and moody and flowy. So the round tipped brush does that. Yet again, I'm just using like a Crayola brush, anything you can find easily where you find groceries. Usually they have stuff like this sometimes in an aisle. And you want to just get your paper wet. So yet again, you want to make sure you have a type of paper that can absorb the water. In this case, I am using watercolor paint, or watercolor paper that I have around the house, but poster board works well also. If your poster board starts to curl up or bead up a little bit, it is time to stop. You have put enough water on that paper. It is crying out to you, please don't put any more water on me for this moment in time. So with this, I kind of put an even distribution of water and I'm just gonna let it kind of like absorb into the paper. So it's gonna be like damp. So while that's going on, you have to figure out your color scheme and the order it's gonna flow in. So in this case, I have these colors to work with here with this kit. You can always mix your own colors. But as I looked at, between looking at these, when you do, think about the rainbow. Think about what's next to each other on the rainbow.
You're fine, you're not in the video.
We're going to start with orange is going to be my first in here. I'm going to angle you guys down so you can see my paper. We're going to start with some orange. And then we're going to work our way into some pink. And then we are also going to then go to purple and then green, because for you color lovers out there, you probably may know that if you put pink and green together, you're going to get grayish brown, which is good to get dark, beautiful neutral tones. But in this case, we kind of want a rainbowy effect, and then we'll pull our neutrals in. So to do this, I have already put a few dots of color into my cups, and then I'm going to add a little bit of water. Like the last project, since we're making our paint, you want to test it out just to see how dark it is so you kind of know what you're getting into. So each one of these just needs a little bit of water to start. And then I would recommend, like, this is a gel-based food coloring. So you're going to want to mix it up a little bit and make sure that it got fully distributed into the water. So once we have our paint, we're working in the center. We're working from light to dark. And we are going to do a lot of dabbing, and you're going to want those paper towels nearby. So as we look at this, as I mentioned before, we have light going out into dark. So the best thing about this kind of project is seeing how it works, because it's not going to look instantly like this, or like this for that matter. So I am going to start with my orange paint to be my center. And I'm going to have water. I need water and paper towels nearby. So I'm going to get my paintbrush wet, grab up some of this orange, and I'm going to start just patting it on here. And as you can see, it is starting to kind of move around. It's really wet. You want to leave a white spot. Now, if you're like, whoa, this got away from me, and you don't like what's going on here, you can go back up with your paper towel and kind of just dab some of it up. But we do want it to be wet so that these colors can kind of flow into each other. This is the kind of project that you have a certain amount of control over. So it's kind of a great experience for learning to let go and see what happens. If you're not that kind of person, I'm just warning you. So then you want to come back in and dab some more. Now, you don't have to completely make circles going out. Because if you see in this picture that's our reference, which I will just stick right here, we have, it's not like a certain pattern. It's kind of varied and all over the place. I wouldn't say completely copy something like this, because like I said, the paint is partially kind of has a mind of its own in this case. So you want to just create puddles of this and maybe break it up a little bit where not every pink part is touching the orange. You want to bring it in a little too. Now I'm starting to lose my white center, which is going to be my light source. So I'm going to come back in and kind of drag and pull some of that out. So now that I've used my pink, you also want to work it into the orange a little bit. You're going to get some really cool shades of pinks and orange. I'm going to rinse out my brush a little. I'm going to dry it off, and I'm going to move into the purple. So as we're working wet into wet, we have this sense of this is going to be moving around. And what's kind of cool about it is you really don't know what this is going to look like until it dries. So as you keep going, you may want to put music on. As you do this, it can be a fun experience, especially once you have this in the tray. What happens in the tray can stay in the tray. So you can start working on one as your kids do too, if you wanted. But always have those paper towels nearby. So now that we've done purple, I am going to pull this cool turquoise color that comes with it, the kit, or the set of food colorings. So you kind of start working your way into your circle a little bit. You want to pull that dark in a tiny bit and kind of pull it around. So now I've mostly covered this, as you can see. We almost have something that kind of resembles a sunset. Now, if you start puddling in certain areas and it's making you uncomfortable and it's moving around, you don't like what's happening, you can always come back in with your paper towel and lift some of this up. But the other fun thing too is you can also kind of move this around a little bit to get your colors to kind of like, maybe if they're settling too much in one spot and you don't really like it, you can move them around a bit. So once you do that, we've had this thin paint, we've worked wet into wet. You have two options. If this experience has stressed you out to the max of working wet into wet and not being able to control it, you can take a break, wait for it to dry and come back the next day, or you can keep forging on. So we need a thicker application of paint for this next part. I have around the house acrylics because I teach painting, but you can also use watercolor that is, or tempera, any kind of like thicker paint. You could even just use more black watercolor if you wanted to and mix it in, but I'm going to put a little bit of paint into my purple watercolor, because if you look at your pictures, it's not completely just black around the edges of these galaxies. There's still a little bit of light coming in. So I've made like a purpley black color here. And what's great is it's a little thicker than what's on the paper. So I'm going to mix this up with my brush, dab off the goopiness of the acrylic black, and I'm going to start working this into my edges. And if you find this is like not thick enough, you can always add more. But the trick here is to just kind of work it in from the edges out. So this is why for this project, especially if you're able to tape down your edges, it's a great thing because you're going to work from the edges out, and you also just don't want your paper to start curling up on you, because it's definitely, mine is beading up. Okay, so the trick is to hold your painting buddies accountable, and they should hold you accountable too if you're working with other people. If it's beautiful and they think you're overdoing it, you should kind of have maybe a level of being able to tell each other, you know, that's good, I think you can stop. Or if you're working with little people and you're like, this is the best thing you've ever done, have another piece of paper and just swap it out real quick. Because they could keep going and maybe they won't notice you took that perfect thing away that might get overworked or lost. But let's say you do get lost. Let's say you have a little buddy that is just like, I love black paint, and just is totally going to town and having a fantastic time. And then they look and they're like, oh no, that got darker than I meant. Paper towels. It can lighten things up, pull things out, and move it around. And this is something that in some ways can go very quickly. But at this point, the best thing to do is to let it dry before you do the next step, which is creating stars. So in theory, you will let this dry, or if you are impatient, you want to get it done, you can just see what happens when you put stars on top of wet paint. So here I have the dry version of this. And what I'm going to do is pull out an old toothbrush, and I'm going to cover up my area a little bit. So yet again, you might want to go outside for this. If it's that kind of day, you might definitely want to cover up your area and your child that you're working with. I'm using acrylic paint because it's thick. And this is definitely a fun time to experiment because you don't have to just use this technique for stars. You can create action paintings, which is pretty much kind of like what this project is. There's a lot of moving around, a lot of moving paint. And so we have our found paintbrush, which is an old toothbrush. And what we're going to do is have this thick paint. And this is really something you might before you really get into it, you might want to practice this on another piece of paper to get your technique down. So I've just kind of put this in the paint. And now what I'm going to do is just take my thumb, put it on top, and get close, and just run my thumb over it. Mm-hmm. Can you have too many stars? I do not think so. So this is a point where you can just make your project come to life with splattering stars all over your paper. Other fun things you can do once this is dry, let's say you love a narrative. You're a family that loves a good story. Maybe you're a family that loves science. Well, this is a point where you can then, while this is drying, pull out another piece of paper and create something to glue stick on top when it's dry. So here I have the man on the moon with a rocket stuck in his eye. Or you could do an actual study of all the planets and do them in proportion. It depends on your mood and your personality and what you want to do. Also, if paint stars are not enough for you, you can always add a little glitter glue on top when it's all done, which adds another element of magic. And that is how to create a galaxy.
Wow. That's beautiful. And I love the moon in addition to what you created today. I'm excited about the glitter glue too.
Yeah, you can never go wrong with glitter glue.
You can never go wrong with glitter glue.
The glitter is trapped in the glue. I mean, it's ingenious. So we have done 2 projects and we have a third, unless there's anything you guys want to say or have questions about.
I guess I just have a quick question about the food coloring project. So you showed us that you can use the 4 colors that come in the box of food coloring. Do you also recommend mixing and experimenting with those colors to create new colors in a cup to work with? Or is it better to do that on your paper?
You could definitely make your own. You could do it either way because it's so much like watercolor that you could either, these colors are kind of funny because there's not a lot of, you don't get the primaries basically, but yeah, if you had a different set, you could definitely make your own colors in the cup. I would test them on the paper just to make sure you know what you got going on.
Awesome. Oh, look, Rachel has her own food coloring handy.
A different
I use these, the McCormick's ones, and I just get these little things at the dollar store, these little cups, and mix up the colors, Bella. So I usually have like 3 or 4 colors. because I hate being bored when I'm on phone calls and stuff. So I'll just do watercolors.
That's awesome.
Now you
Wow.
know.
Now I
There's
know.
something for every age group in this family.
Amazing. I
So
think, yeah, we're ready for the third one.
Yes, we have one more project. So you may be wondering, who are the two studio assistants I have behind here? And this next project is based off of Mexican folk art using tin. I'll be right back. So often, a lot of work, folk art from Mexico is, here we have a tin frame, or it can also be creating sacred paintings of things that are important, dear, religion, saints, things like that. So we're going to take a twist on this medium of using tin, as well as the idea of creating something special or dear, and kind of play with that idea for this next project. So we are going to be creating a tin portrait of a sacred item in your life. Could be your favorite toy. It could be some sort of thing that just brings you joy in your house that normally wouldn't be elevated to the level of importance as being created or turned into a painting or piece of art. So this is one of those times where it's fun to kind of look around the house and think, wow, what really just like brings my family joy? Or what's a fun thing I love doing? Some of you might end up painting pictures of your paintbrushes. Some of you might have really cool action figures or maybe even electronic devices. In this case, my family discovered the joy of a card game called Throw Burrito, which really ultimately ends up us chasing each other around the house and throwing burritos. There's two versions, as you can see, small, indoor, and the outdoor version. So for this case, I did a portrait of a burrito, and I'm going to show you how to set this up. So to create your tin, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of boxes around my house. Cardboard boxes. So have someone with great dexterity and good use of dull scissors to cut up a piece of box for you. And then you're going to need tin foil to create your surface that you're going to do this drawing on. So normally this would be done out of tin if we were creating legit Mexican folk art. But in this case, we're going to use what we have around the house. So you're going to take your tin foil. Usually it's like two sides. I would put the shinier side facing the table. You have cardboard. So what you're going to do is, hopefully you have a large glue stick around. You can do it with Elmer's, but you just want it to fully dry before you use your surface with the Elmer's glue. So I have my glue stick, and I am just going to go to town, getting this very thickly applied. And once I do, I'm going to lay this down. And I am going to put some more glue on the edges here. And then you're basically going to just wrap this like a package. You don't want your little buddies to cut their fingers or anything on the tin foil. So you want to just create a nice, you could cut it off, but this creates a nice smooth edge around the sides so that we don't get poked. So once you create your surface, you have two ways you can go. Depends on how daring you're feeling. So now I have my piece of tin to use. What's cool about this is that since it's cardboard, it's a little squishy, so you're able to make texture, which I will show you later. So you got to figure out, what am I drawing? Now, you don't have to do a portrait. You can do whatever your heart desires. You could do patterns, and you could just draw a still life, whatever you can think of. But here, for this project, the thought is that I'm going to be doing a picture of something dear to me around the house. So in this case, I have a burrito. Now, there's things you want to keep in mind depending on who you are and how you make your art. You could just start going for it and drawing on here, but you have to keep in mind that you can't erase because this is creating texture. So if you want to go for it, you could just start drawing, or you could create a drawing, as I did here. And then once you create your drawing, you can tape it down. You want to make sure before you start drawing, though, that your piece of paper is the same size or smaller than your tin, because if you end up making a bigger drawing, that would be kind of sad. So tape it down. And then what I like to do is, for no matter who is doing the project, like this was done in pencil, and then I came back with a red colored pencil and traced it so I could see where I had been. So if it was red, you already knew you traced it. So in this case, I have a pen, and I am going to push down, and I am going to draw my burrito. Now, the only reason to do this is so you can get this picture just the way you want it. You can erase, you can practice it, and then when you finally got it the way you like it, then you can come back and just trace the lines you meant to be there. So my burritos are floating in the sky because they are being thrown. So I'm going to come through, trace all this, and push down, because you're not going to have actual lines when you lift this up. What you're going to have are indentations.
Very cool. I love it. Burritos in action.
Okay, so I have this burrito, and I lift this up. This may be hard to see, but we have indentations. We can kind of see it. This is what's fun, is now you could add all sorts of details with your pencil, extra lines. You could create lines to create value and give an illusion of depth with the lines. So I'm going to do some cross hatching over here. I'm going to pretend this is a shadow. Maybe the light doesn't hit this side of the burrito, maybe because it's wrapped on this side. So I'm just going to like make some lines here. Another thing you could do is just add stuff that you feel like adding. You could do a border, make a frame, if you will, around the edge, and just kind of have fun with geometric shapes. You do want to be careful, because if it's not glued down completely everywhere and it's a little loose, like right here, I kind of like made a hole. So you want to just kind of keep these things in mind and know that it's kind of an experiment in working this way with this kind of material. Okay, so you've done all that. You've done your texture, you have your idea. So the next step, you could go a few different ways, lots of options. In this case, I happen to have Sharpies. So of course, these are permanent markers. They will stick to your tinfoil. You will want to supervise younger people with these because they are permanent. So what's really cool about using the Sharpie marker, and if you happen to have one in color, it's really fun because I'm gonna, let's say I'll color in my lettuce. What's fun about this is that it remains shiny. You can see through the ink and you get this shiny sort of feeling. So in this case, for my demo, what I did was I colored in with some details with these. You may only have black. And in that case, you might want to just outline your project too. So it depends on what you're going for. Another fun thing is that if you made details, you don't need to go into those little crevices and draw. You can just draw on the bumpy parts that are raised up, and then you start to see the silver that is down in here. Okay, so we've drawn with pencil and created texture. We've put details on with permanent marker. And then the next step, if you still are engaged and feel so bold, is to actually create paint that will be a little bit transparent. Now, in the adult art world, we add mediums, mixing mediums to our paint to make it do different things. In this case, I have acrylic at my house, but for your little people, you would definitely want maybe some tempera to do this. But you can use either. So you're going to need paint and some liquid detergent. This acts as the medium to create your paint and make it a little bit more translucent. So this will kind of create a different texture to your paint that you're more than you're used to as well. So I'm going to put a little blob of paint here. Some liquid detergent here. And you're going to want like a spoon or a knife. I happen to have a painting pellet. You're going to want to mix this up. And then you end up with a paint with a different kind of consistency. It thins it out a little bit, makes it a little bit more see-through. And then with whatever brushes you have on hand, you can begin to paint in your larger parts of your drawing. Now you can see the brush strokes. So you want to just kind of keep, if you like that look great, if not, just kind of keep moving around. And this is an experiment as well. If you don't want it to be this transparent, you can always add more paint. If you want it to be more transparent, you can always add more liquid detergent. And then in the end, you may have something that looks kind of like this. So you can see I left some parts without paint on them that creates a shiny sort of effect.
Amazing. It probably smells pretty good too because of the dishwashing soap.
It does. Between the coffee and the dishwashing soap.
It's a pretty nice morning so far.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for showing us how to do those 3 art projects. It was a real pleasure having you and Rachel with us this morning for some fun art projects with things that we have lying around the house. We have about 10 minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, be sure to ask your questions now. And I'm just going to share my screen real quick with some links for you guys. Amy is teaching a class at the Creative Workshop this fall. The class that she's teaching is Drawing and Painting Inspired by MAG and Other Museums. We also will be sharing a recording of today's webinar later this week for anybody who couldn't join, or if you would like the demonstration up on your screen while you create at home on your own. And like I mentioned earlier today, we do have PDFs from Amy for each of these 3 art projects. You can find those at our clothesline.rochester.edu hub. Once you get to there, you can click at the Create at Home button to find those PDFs. And thank you again for everybody who joined us today. It's thanks to you that we're able to put on programs like this. And be sure to fill out the survey that will pop up on your browser when we end our webinar today to let us know how your experience was. Amy and Rachel, thank you again for this morning's demonstration, and see you guys later this week for other virtual presentations.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.